talking about Baptists is tricky because, like any group of human beings, Baptist ranks are filled with numerous opinions and perspectives. To make matters worse, Baptists are Congregationalists in our polity, so we don't have a hierarchy telling us what to think or say or do. Everybody has a voice, which makes trying to tell you about who Baptists are and what they believe even trickier. Even their history and origins have some dispute around them. Some Baptists have claimed that we go all the way back to Jesus, John the Baptist, hello. But honestly, that's not where modern Baptists began. So I'm going to try to get to the bottom of things here. So about 80 years after Martin Luther nailed his 95 Theses to the church doors in Wittenberg and the Protestant Reformation began to unfold, there was a group of folks living in England who were mad at the Church of England. The English expression of the Protestant Reformation was the Church of England, and remember, the church and state were one and the same back then. So the Church of England began to draw criticism from folks who felt it hadn't reformed enough. It was too rich, too corrupt, too tied to political power, too fancy. And the people who began to object wanted to purify the church from within, to change it into what they thought it should be. For that, it meant to them that it should be very simple, that Christ was the head of the church, not the king. So among that group of Puritans in the early 1600s, there arose another more radical group called separatists. The separatists didn't think there was much hope for the church at all, and they wanted the freedom to go outside the church, to become separate. That idea, of course, was fraught with all kinds of trouble, not the least of which was that it made King James really, really mad. So there were two men in that extreme group of separatists named John Smythe and Thomas Helwys. And because their views about the church were making things a little bit uncomfortable for them and their families, they ended up packing everybody up, about 40 people, and going to Amsterdam to hang out with some Mennonites. There they concluded that baptism as adults is the way that baptism should be done. That baptism as infants was not biblical. So as that became their new conviction, they suddenly realized that their own infant baptism, in their opinion, was invalid. So to remedy that, John Smythe rebaptized everyone, including himself, which I really would have loved to have been there to see. In 1612, Thomas Helwys took a group of 12 back to England to start a church. That church was a General Baptist church. They were Arminian in their belief, meaning that God's grace is free and open to anyone who would respond. Thomas Helwys wrote a foundational work about religious liberty called A Short Treatise on the Mystery of Iniquity. And for his trouble, he got thrown in jail, during which he died. Meanwhile, all across England and in London in particular, all these pockets of religious dissent were starting to pop up all over the place, and another Baptist church was formed. In the true tradition of Baptist churches naming themselves strangely, this was called the JLJ Church, after the initials of its founders, Henry Jacob, John Lathrop, and Henry Jesse. At the JLJ Church, they were Baptists. They believed in adult believers' baptism, but they were particular Baptists, which means they were Calvinists. They thought that God had already preordained those who would be saved from the beginning of time. So by the 1640s, these strange groups adhering to adult believers' baptism became known as Baptists. While the specifics of their theology varied, such as General and Particular Baptists, what bound them together was the practice of adult believers' baptism. Their groups were also marked by a radical openness to God's gifts. The idea that God works when and where God will, and in and through anybody that God chooses. By the 1640s, in fact, folks were so concerned about these strange Baptists that pamphlets were published, like one called Lucifer's Lackey, or The Devil's New Creation, in which it reads, "When women preach and cobblers pray, the devil has a holiday." Eventually, as you know, some of these strange folks migrated to America, where they mostly settled in New England, and where they acquired for a very short time a famous member named Roger Williams. Outspoken champion of religious liberty, Roger Williams was a Baptist for 4 months only, but he founded the first Baptist church in America in Providence, Rhode Island. And that's how it all began.